So here, if I copy that URL, this is from ArcGIS Online. If I plug that in, I can now see my assets, and there's the little pins dropped on there on a map. So why is that important? Because now I'm able to see these riskiest assets dropped on top of my authoritative data, and I can now make that actionable in a couple different ways. So with that, I actually want to show over to a brief demo and just kind of walk you through some of this to show you the ease of use. And what I'm really focused on here is that if you have WebGIS today, you're set up with the technology in a matter of hours. It's really that easy. The focus then is on the effort to go in and define your strategies. And that requires a little bit more thought. But if you spend some time on it, I bet you can find some existing attribute data that can drive your strategy. So I've logged in. This is a CityWorks instance. I do have it fully configured off of our sample data, but we're not even going to focus on that. But I did want to just show you the very brief GIS configuration. The minimal amount you'd have to do is to come in here. We're literally pointing to a electric and land service, which is really coming off of a hosted ArcGIS Online, or I'm sorry, server-based instance there. So we're using our ArcGIS server in our example here today. You get that, and you have service layers. So if you look at the service layers, these are our typical electric layers that have been configured coming off of that service. What are those really? Well, there are layers in the MXD or in Pro that we've now published into ArcGIS server, right? It's that simple. You link these things up, you give them names, say these are the assets we want to manage and potentially utilize in operational insights. So I said there was a plugin, so I'm just going to go in here, the CityWorks Insights application. I can click on that guy. It takes me into Insights. And like I said, they've made it really simple, and they kind of walk you top to bottom as to what you're taking a look at. So I'm going to start with setting up an asset strategy. Now, the example I had in the presentation was for poles, but I'm going to do a quick transformer one just to show you how easy it is. So I'm dropping down my asset group. I only have one electric distribution, and I'm going to choose transformer bank. There's one existing. I'll pop that one up in a bit, but I'm going to click add, and we're just going to do a illuminate demo. And you can have different rating levels even within your multiple strategies too. So I'm just going to leave the default of 5 for now. So I'll save that guy in. He's now created here. Now these same 3 factors that we were talking about, probability, consequence, business risk, that's what we're focused on here. So the first thing we're doing is we're going to use probability of failure. As I click add, I'm looking at the GIS fields. Where are they coming from? Oh yeah, those RESTful services. There's no additional work to do here. It reads your Esri domain data, and or you can see the actual individual data in there. So as far as a probability of failure on one of these, the example we had in this data set was that we have delta wiring tracked. It's a yes/no domain field. And when we talked to the folks, this is on Garland's data, when I talked to the Garland GIS administrator, he asked the engineers, and they said, well, if it's been wired with delta wiring, it's usually a pretty good indication, and we would like to maintain those. That could cause an issue within the equipment. And I'm not an electrical engineer, but I'll take their word for it. So we're going to configure this with a value. You can be a value, or you can be a range, or utilize a range here. So we're going to save that. Prompts me on the right-hand side. So here are my domain values from Esri, yes and no. It's really that easy. So I'm going to say, okay, if we don't have delta wiring, we're going to give it a rating of 1. Save that in. If we do have delta wiring, I'm going to give it a rating. You could go all the way up 15, could be 100. So what it's doing is just going to apply these things along with the corresponding ratings into the system. So I could then add multiple other fields, to be clear. For the sake of the demo today, I'm just going to add the 1. So over here, we're on probability. We can now jump down to consequence of failure, and it's a very, very similar exercise. So if we're thinking about transformers, what's the biggest indicator to us about the failure or the consequence of a transformer failing? Right? What's an easy one? Size? Is that what somebody said? Yeah, so let's go bank KVA, right? So we go bank KVA, and here maybe is a good range one because there's a lot of different KVAs. We wouldn't want to put maybe every one in individually. That would take a long time. But as we save that in as a range, we've got all the domain values there. They start at 0, and in this database, they go to 2,500, right? Our biggest 3-phase, probably a pad mount transformer. I don't think they make overhead 2,500, so probably not overhead. So, point being, so we're going to go lower limit. I'm going to go from 0 to 100 kVA. Okay, pretty standard there. We'll give this a rating of 1. Those are probably not our most important ones. We can go in here and go 101 to 500, and maybe that's a rating of 5. You get the exercise pretty quickly here. 501 to 1,000. Could be a rating of 10. And then maybe we want to say anything that's over 1,000. Let's go up to that 2501 just to make sure we capture our whole data set there. Maybe that bumps all the way up to like a 50, right, to really make those guys pop. So all I've done is configured a very, very simple scheme here. Now again, I can do this again, multiple attributes. Maybe I want to say my three-phase transformers. Okay, they're probably the biggest consequence if they went out. If that pole gets hit, be it overhead three-phase or a pad-mounted, that's probably a bigger deal. Maybe I have a life support indicator, right? That's a big one that we really care about. So those type of things, very easy. You just got to go, you literally go through your attributes. What do I have? What can I use? Plug those in. So at that simplest level, I've configured the two things that we need. I've configured probability and consequence. Flip over to the next side. We're going to skip maintenance strategies today, but if I was able to maintain those, I could factor that data into the risk model too. And you're going to go to the calculation side. I'll jump back to my transformers. And you see I have two strategies here existing. I'm going to create a new one. And I'm going to say this is my Illuminate calc for fun. And I can grab the Illuminate demo, and I'll save that in. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm actually not going to click the calculate button, but I'll talk through it. So this does take a little bit of time, and I've got 16 or 17,000 transformers in here, but it's going to go through, grab that data, run the multiplication, calculate those statistics, and create an entry in the CityWorks database for every asset. Hopefully that makes sense. That takes, I think on this data set on our servers, it might take 5 minutes. It's not like terribly long, but I don't want to make you wait for 5 minutes to see the results. So, like our good chef from the previous slide, I will pull out my completed recipe and show you the result of that calculation. So let me see here. Pull that up. Should just pull our results up because this one I've already calculated. Drum roll, please. All right, so here's this side over here. And we have a lot of columns. Let me drop a couple columns off just to simplify that view that we don't need to see here. So pretty quickly, you can just see what happened here. This is just a calculation results. Far left is what CityWorks Insights calls my UID. That's my facility ID. That's the unique link over to the assets in the GIS. We have the probability of failure, the consequence of failure, and then that BRE. Now the BRE, these are ones, and I can tell you based on having known this calculation, that's pretty low. I'm not worried about those. But I also have my spatial enablement. I have my X and Ys and my lat and my long. So now we can get to town and start doing some fun stuff. So I could go through, I could page through these as we said. I could export to a CSV, do some more outside analysis, maybe in Excel or something like that. But we want to take it and make it spatially enabled. Take it back. I'm going to do one more thing before I make it spatially enabled. I'm going to jump to the transformer bank here in the calculation definitions and grab that same guy. This is the dashboard. It's just useful, I think, to see that graph. So that same transformer data is now being pulled in. If I can see it statistically, I can make some really quick decisions. So we'll give this a second to pull up here. Cue the Jeopardy music. All right. So consequence of failure, I get them individually. So my COF, I've got 1,742 transformers that are pretty high. Now, most of my transformers, based on the inputs, they're pretty low. So that's a good sign. So that's a good way to just bubble these up just with consequence. And I jumped ahead. I should have done probability first. So I'm going backwards, but that's okay. I also have about 1,700 and change of high probability of failure transformers. Now, interestingly, just because I looked at the data because I wanted to see, they're not the same set of transformers. The fact that they're both in that 1,700 range is, to some extent, a coincidence. So we multiply those, right? We now get an exponential factor plugged in. So when we do this, we get down and we see, okay, our business risk exposure from 1,800 in both those categories drops to 775. Now, if I'm talking I have 16,000 transformers in my service territory, that's a much more manageable number, which can drive things like, what am I going to do? Am I going to inspect, maintain, or replace? So now we've kind of identified that, seeing that visually. Management, you can see if I did this in front of managers, they'd get that. Okay, these guys are the ones we need to really focus on. So now let's go ahead and make them spatially enabled. So in that calculation search, this allows me to do some filtering on that because I really don't care about those lower level transformers that are not very risky. So I'm going to go grab my transformer bank one more time. Each one of these is just a separate module. I'm walking top to bottom, by the way, within Insights. So I can come in here, I can grab transformer calculation. We can search it. So instead of just searching them all, I want to come and say, let's give me a BRE that's greater than, let's just throw in 20. And I think that should get us to that same number we just saw. So now I search the existing one, and this gets me to the 775 that were kind of my riskiest. If I want to see even higher, we could go and say, give me anything over 24 and search that. So I guess the real point I want to make here is that when the data is cached, it all comes back very quickly. I'm down to 609 transformers in this case. So it's just the calculation runs once, the rest of it's just analysis. So with that, if I can save this search, I'll just call this the Illuminate saved search. Leave it as a user. Once I do that, I get my links enabled. And I could show you the other ones, but I want to focus on that pretty cool URL. So as I click on the URL, here's that awesome JSON. Bill can read this pretty well. He pretty much just memorized it. But again, this is taking that non-spatial data source and spatially enabling it. So it's not really ArcGIS server hosted, but it's a way that you can plug in. It was based on a pretty cool developer sample. We need to figure out how to do this too, Bill, so we should talk about that. So now I'm going to take this URL, which effectively is like an ArcGIS server URL, and I'm going to go over to, let's make it easy, ArcGIS Online. Hopefully everybody has some WebGIS going on these days. So I'm going to open up my SSP Town Electric web map. Open that on my web, let's get a new one here. So this will come up. I'm on my VPN, hitting my back office server. Drum roll, and there's my color by circuit map, right? You guys all probably have a similar looking beast in your organization. So here I have all my data. I'm going to go and just prep this a little bit by saying I'm going to go to my transformer bank, which is here, and make the pop-ups enabled. So I can just click on them, right? Hopefully you're familiar with some of these steps. So how do I get that really hard to calculate CityWorks data available inside of ArcGIS Online? Well, I go to add layer from the web. I paste it in, it thinks about it, and now I can add it. So just this quickly, I now have all those assets on the map. So that's kind of useful. I mean, I think it's pretty useful to be able to see it there. We could go do some things, but interestingly, or maybe not unexpectedly, based on my calculation, my assets are kind of all over the map. I have the full gamut. So I could dispatch crews to go do that next year. But what I can do with this in very simple ArcGIS Online, and again, we talk about using insights for ArcGIS. You can now join to other data sources, do even more. But what if I just do a quick heat map? Let's just roll this up a little bit. Just that quickly now I can see, are there some focus areas? If I have a crew available for 2 weeks, where do I want to send them? Well, I probably want to send them to the northeast or the southwest. The middle areas, there's some in there, but they're not as congested. So I can get a lot of bang for buck by dispatching my crews to certain areas. Let's just zoom in a little bit here and take a look. Get into where you get some facility data. Let that refresh. Drum roll, please. It's coming. There we go. All right, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so we still see some hot spots. So let's just zoom in even further to like this dude over here. All right, so we got these guys here. It'll refresh here momentarily. This internet is not, and I'm not even on the fast internet. They got the other. I'm just on the regular person internet. What if I can click? I'm clicking. All right, there it came in. All right, cool. So first click is doing this. And what is it showing me? It's actual attribute data, but this is the actual asset calculation from CityWorks, represented as an actual hosted web layer, even though it's really not. So I can see, okay, yes, the POF was 5, the COF was 5, that BRE, my risk, was 25. This is one of my riskiest assets. It was put on the map. Now if I click the next button and get the actual transformer, we can go just verify that very quickly. So our rated KVA, 500, so that boosted it to some extent. And I had a couple other factors in this equation. So this, delta wiring is yes. And then in the one I used for the example here, I think I also tossed on maybe phase count, kind of as I talked through that. So the point being is, whether this is your calculation or not, I don't really care. You're going to create your own calculations. You figure that out. You plug it in, and just that quickly, we found focus areas on the map to dispatch our crews. Does that make sense? Pretty easy. So you might spend a week or more getting your strategies built out, but that's just the fun part. The technology is there and can be enabled very, very quickly. Let's get one more slide for you. I don't know where we are in time, but I'm going to keep going. So insights, results. What do we do now that we can do this? And hopefully you see, all right, a couple of weeks, we got this nailed down. Let's talk about our business drivers. Our capital replacement budgets. How often? Rob, you get asked, probably about a capital replacement budget, and here's the dollars we have. What are we going to work on next year? That's a hard question to answer sometimes, but if you have some tools, you can bring a very intelligent answer, so we can drive that. Inspection and maintenance, our O&M. Have to spend those dollars. Everybody's really pushing down on the dollars. We can now hit those riskiest assets on that side. Technology-wise, how do we then make this actionable? I'm a big, big fan of empowering the data. I don't want to just show you what the data is. Take it. Let's create a work order. If you have CityWorks, let's create a CityWorks work order. If you have a lifecycle side, let's create a lifecycle work request. If you have Maximo, well, let's generate a Maximo work order to go out and inspect these assets. And then, of course, integrating this data to other systems. Again, it's a RESTful endpoint. We can plug that into almost anything. So it could be your mobile inspections. Let's feed this into TC or Epoch or any other mobile application you have. Maybe your distribution planning. If you're trying to increase and show where your funding is going to go for a new substation or new circuits, let's feed that data in there. The point being is it's data you have today. How do we utilize that to build strategies for tomorrow? And I think that's a pretty interesting concept to think through. And that, I think, is it. 11:05. Nice. So I was supposed to leave 5 minutes for questions, and I did. So any questions out there? Hopefully, does that make sense? It's pretty easy to do. Roll it out today. All right.
Who's in?
Who's in? Got a sign-up sheet up front.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir, John.
How did you get that heat map? Is that just part of the RESTful endpoint from Earl that you had?
You can do that with anything that's in ArcGIS Online.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just doing a density analysis. So if you just flip to the options, I could run that on any layer in ArcGIS Online, flip to the options for it, and just...
Just by virtue of it being point features?
Yes. Precisely. All right. Cool. Well, thank you guys very much for your attention. Hopefully you found that insightful. And we'll see you in the closing session after the next break-in session.